What does the brutal and senseless random slaying of an elderly couple have to do with a professional baseball player? Well, it turns out that this awful murder wasn't so random after all, and the successful pro ball player, Daniel Serafini, had a whole lot more skeletons in his closet than anyone could have guessed. This isn't your average juicy baseball scandal, with crooked bookies and drug deals under the table. This goes beyond that. This is an unforgivable sin. Here's the story of Daniel: a whole lot of debt, a nanny, and with a sprinkling of burglary and child endangerment thrown into the double murder case that came from left field. Let's get into it. You guys might have noticed that I'm a bit of a baseball nut. It's not just that I love the sport, the scandals within the game are on another level. It's like looking into the 1940s mafia families, in-house drama, cheating, bets, corrupt bookies and players, high stakes and big money. But Daniel Serafini's different. This whole terrible debacle isn't at all like reading a gab rag. This is just tragic for the victims and their families and utterly despicable on the perpetrator's part. But you know me, we're going to start at the beginning. Unfortunately, all of the drama happened after Daniel's time on the field because his baseball career was average at best. Daniel came from an Italian-American family and caught the eye of scouts early on, mainly due to his wicked arm. Daniel was always more of a pitcher than an all-rounder, and even then, he wasn't the kind of talent that got anyone excited. He was no Walter Johnson or Cy Young, that's for sure. He was good enough for pro ball, but he wasn't that good. His ERA averaged around 6.02 during his playing days between '96 and 2007. Starting for the Minnesota Twins, he moved on to a different team almost every year: Chicago Cubs, San Diego Padres, Pittsburgh Pirates, Cincinnati Reds, and finally ending with the Colorado Rockies. In 2007, he was officially benched. He tested positive for steroids. He still attests that he'd taken medication for an illness while touring Japan. Regardless, he was suspended for 50 games. At the age of 33, and with this scandal now over his head, Daniel called it quits in the United States and focused on playing in Mexico for a couple of years without much success. In 2013, he briefly came out of retirement and took the mound for Italy in the World Baseball Classic. He used his $14 million net worth to open a baseball academy in 2011 in Sparks, Nevada, and in 2015, he and his wife, Erin, opened a bar called the Oak Tavern. It was featured on the reality show, Bar Rescue. He then invested in a commercial building down in Reno that he rented out to a bar, a restaurant, and a gym. He even dabbled in mining at one point. The bar failed to turn a profit, the baseball academy tanked, and his enormous estate, complete with his pools, a tennis court, and a whole golf course, was bleeding cash to maintain. The mining operation was chugging at fumes. The building in Reno was doing all right, but not well enough to keep the rest of the sinking ships afloat. There was a whole lot going on in the background of all his financial difficulties, too. He'd begun an affair with the family nanny, Samantha Scott. Erin knew about the affair, and she was completely fine with it. They long since agreed to an open marriage, as long as each of them kept their dalliances discreet. Daniel despised his wealthy in-laws, Robert Gary Spohr and Wendy Louise Wood. They made it quite clear that they felt that Erin could have married better. They disagreed with Daniel on politics and clearly favored their other daughter's marriage more than Erin's. And when it came to money and investments, they were always at odds with Daniel's choices. He probably should have listened to them. They'd made millions in real estate and knew how to work with money. And Daniel had no background in large investments outside of being a mid-level baseball player who liked shiny things and partied a little too hard. As the years went on and Daniel burned one new venture after the other into the ground, they became more and more involved with Erin's side of the family. Her parents were stinking rich, real estate moguls who had a net worth of $23 million. As Daniel's ventures fumbled, they kept his failing empire afloat by supporting the couple financially. They maintained Daniel's 2 homes, they paid off their cars, and paid for the couple's 2 kids' school fees. Wendy and Robert weren't stingy with their money when it came to Daniel and Erin's troubles. I mean, they handed out plenty of checks to cover odds and ends and never asked for any of it back. But Daniel felt that they were rubbing their wealth in his face. He felt inferior, like a failure, and he hated his in-laws' guts. It was later proved that he'd been planning to kill them since 2012 when he offered someone $20,000 to kill them. The details of that murder-for-hire plot was never fully fleshed out, but it just cemented the fact that Daniel wanted to get rid of them for years before he finally did the unthinkable, and he wasn't making a secret of how much better he'd be off if they were dead to anyone who stood still long enough, especially since their deaths would result in an $11 million payout to their daughter. Then there's the nanny, Samantha Scott. She was always around, but it's unlikely that Wendy and Robert were aware of the affair between her and Daniel that started early in 2021 or late 2020. This really is a very odd arrangement. An open marriage is one thing, but Erin didn't just know about the affair, she was very close with Samantha. They hung out all the time. She did odd jobs around the house, helped Wendy with their horses, and babysat when it was needed. This year wasn't just strange for the couple because of the strange three-way affair, it was a disastrous one for Daniel overall from a financial standpoint. He was officially out of money. Every single penny of his $14 million earnings from his baseball days were burned through, and he was still $300,000 in debt. He was going to lose his properties, and there was no way out of this mess if he was going to rely on his own business prowess. To add to the drama, Daniel was going through a lot of blow. He'd always been a bit of a party hound, but in the last year, he was definitely barreling toward a full-blown cocaine addiction. On the morning of June the 5th, Erin and their two sons, aged 3 years and just 7 months old, were at Robert and Wendy's estate, located on the west shoreline of Lake Tahoe. They spent the morning boating with Grandma and Grandpa. Before they'd gone out for the boat ride, Wendy'd given her daughter a check for $90,000. No strings attached, no formal agreement, just a buffer so that they could pay mortgages for a few months until they figured out a more permanent solution. This was the last straw for Daniel. His growing dependence on his in-laws to keep his businesses and properties afloat was emasculating. To make matters worse, this habit of theirs of passing out breadcrumbs was just another tactic to keep him dependent on them when he felt he was entitled to so much more. The day before Daniel and Samantha had headed off to Nevada, booking themselves into a casino hotel in Elko where they spent the night drinking and partying, Samantha was under the impression that Daniel was picking up a package of cocaine. Daniel told her to switch her phone off, but she forgot to do that, allowing investigators to later track their movements over the next 2 days. Honestly, Samantha wasn't too bothered by the request to switch her phone off. Daniel went on drug drives often, so this was nothing new. But what she should have questioned was that Daniel took them to an open field soon after they arrived and took a few practice shots with a gun that he didn't care to explain where he'd gotten it. Even more alarming, he'd fashioned a homemade silencer made out of PVC pipe over the muzzle. The whole point of going out into the desert was to see how well his little DIY project worked. They made the 5-hour drive back the next morning. When they arrived at Lake Tahoe, Daniel instructed Samantha to wait at a corner market a mile away from his in-laws' house. Before he got out of the car, he grabbed a face mask out of the glove compartment. He left her there, dressed in sneakers, long white pants, a sweatshirt, and wearing a backpack. If you're wondering how it's possible that Erin received the money while Daniel and Samantha were in Nevada, and he somehow knew about it and managed to plan out the attack just a day in advance, well, I had questions about that too, because this messes up the timeline. The deference relied heavily on the fact that Daniel was resentful of the handouts that Wendy and Robert were holding over his head, and this check was the last straw for him. It's possible that he'd been planning it well in advance, and this new check just happened to come on the very day that he planned on killing his wife's parents. I'm not a fan of timeline discrepancies, but the cell phone pings and Erin's accounts do line up, so the check must have been a coincidence and Daniel was planning it all along. I have to say it gives me heartburn to do that, but coincidence really does seem to be the case. Daniel knew that his wife, her parents, and the couple's 2 children would be out most of the morning and afternoon on that boat ride, so he snuck into the house from the driveway's entrance and hid inside for a whole 3 hours. CCTV caught a man wearing the same clothes that Samantha later described in court sneaking up the driveway. Daniel remained concealed while the kids wind down and Erin left them in her parents' care. Just minutes after she pulled out of the driveway, Daniel stepped out from his hiding place inside the house and shot his father-in-law in the back of the head, point blank. He then located his mother-in-law and shot her too. Wendy raised her hand over her face and the bullet went into her wrist, so he shot her a second time, this time in the head. Daniel made his way a mile down the road on foot and got into Samantha's car. Then they drove across the Nevada state line while Daniel threw his clothes, backpack, gloves, and parts of the gun out of the window as they drove. Miraculously, Wendy survived the attack, but she remembered nothing of the day her husband died. After suffering a head wound of that magnitude, she didn't just suffer from memory loss. Her disabilities as a result of the damage were severe, leaving her housebound, unable to get by without assistance, and as a result of all of this, deeply depressed. Wendy ended her own life inside her home 2 years after the attack. In October of 2023, 2 years after the murders, Daniel and Samantha were arrested. Daniel was adamant about his innocence, but Samantha sang like a canary the first chance she got. She'd testify against Daniel, stating that she had no idea about what he was about to do and that he only confessed what the crazy road trip was about months after the murders. Erin, on the other hand, stood by her husband throughout the trial, unwilling to believe that her husband could have possibly killed her own parents. Daniel was sentenced to life without parole for the charges of murder, attempted murder, burglary, and child endangerment because his children were in the home at the time the killing took place. Samantha got 3 years for her part in all of this, and Erin did eventually divorce Daniel. But here's my hiccup with all of this. The defense heavily relied on that last $90,000 check, stating that this was Daniel's breaking point. But Daniel was already in Nevada practicing with his DIY silencer the day before. Sure, this could all have been long in the planning, and like I pointed out, the check might have been a coincidence. My main concern here is that Samantha couldn't have been as oblivious as she made it seem. No one sits by while their lover is testing out silencers, waiting patiently for hours, and then watches him toss evidence out of a car and just accepts it like this was just a normal day. I call BS. She knew and she helped him do it. She could have gone to police at any time during the 2 years before the arrest, but she did not. Even Erin's part in all of this is frustrating. Despite the phone records, the fact that police found the evidence that Daniel threw out of the car window, and the fact that the man on CCTV matched Daniel in proportions and height exactly. I can imagine that a loyal wife would be willing to stand by her man through hell and high water. But could she really, with all of the evidence mounted against her husband, still be convinced of his innocence? I mean, really, how much mental gymnastics do you need to do to justify his innocence? He continued to write saucy letters to both his mistress and his wife from behind bars, so Erin definitely wasn't his first priority as he was for her. I don't know, but to me, the two women's part in all of this stinks. That's all I'm saying. Maybe you have different ideas. There are many people out there who say that the man on the video doesn't match Daniel Serafini at all, and that the drive from Nevada just to catch the elderly couple alone in an hour's window of opportunity was just too tight and too coincidental for it all to have been planned by one single person. Personally, I think Daniel's guilty, just like the court decreed. But I think he had more help than anyone's letting on. What do you think? You know the drill. Drop those comments down below, hit the like, don't forget to subscribe, and remember, the majority of all crimes are committed by people familiar to the victim. Maybe we should all be a little more vigilant about who's sitting next to us at the dinner table. See you in the next one, people. Cheers.